And welcome one, welcome all. This is episode 2 of Drafts with Jordan and Josh. I am one of your co-hosts, Josh Liskowitz. I am joined by the venerable Jordan Plocker, he of many leather-bound books. Jordan, how are you doing today?
Woo! I am great, Josh. Just sitting here in the smell of rich mahogany and ready to talk draft.
All right, awesome. We are pretty pumped up, Jordan, about the responses we got from our first episode last week. So thanks for all of your responses. Make sure to visit, give us a 5-star rating, a nice review. That seems really simple and trivial, but it goes a long way toward us getting the word out, so we really appreciate that.
Yes.
Jordan, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. Why don't you tell us about some of the awesome things that PFF is unveiling this summer?
Yeah, again, it just changes to our podcast. We have our history of PFF podcast, which is going on right now, which is awesome. Episode 2 just dropped with the Godfather, Neil Hornsby.
Great episode.
Oh, yeah, great episode. We have this draft-centric podcast now with you and I, which is so amazing. I think episode 1 has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. That may or may not be true. I'm not sure yet. But then we also have some really cool subscription products like PFF Edge. Is one of them. That's got your fantasy and your NFL essentials. So it's basically gives you all the bare things that you would want across all the different spectrums of football. So you basically get unlocks all the premium stuff for fantasy, for your DFS stuff, and for NFL draft. You get your player grades for your NFL players, including snap counts, blocking and career grades, and then all sorts of expert fantasy stuff, again, that I say that I don't really understand, include Jeff Ratcliffe's weekly wide receiver and corner matchup charts, O-line fantasy stats, handcuff index, shadow coverage matrix. Again, woo! Our fantasy stuff is incredible. Those guys, like I said, win awards every year. But then you also get the NFL Draft Pass with in-season analysis, position rankings, and signature stats for top draft prospects. And that's what you and I, Josh, love is the Draft Pass. That's our baby. It's what we work on every day. And then we also have another product. Josh, why don't you tell us about PFF Elite?
Yeah, and the great thing about PFF Elite now is if you leave us some comments on this podcast, leave us a review, you could be randomly selected to win this for a full year. That is a value of about $200. So that's a fantastic deal.
Woo-hoo.
Again, a great reason.
Review? Can I do that? Can I win since an employee, or do I have to just be a listener?
I think you have to be a listener,
Dang
Jordan.
it. This is a great deal.
It is a great deal. It is a great deal. I'm jealous. But here's what comes with the PFF Elite. First off, you get all the PFF Edge features that Jordan talked about. You get our 2016 signature stats. That is the baby that everybody loves. You get last year's. You're going to get this year's when they come out. You're also going to get the PFF Elite stats from this year. That's a little bit more detailed. You're going to get our DFS Optimizer, which is my favorite thing to do over the summer, is to just do mock draft after mock draft after mock draft for my fantasy league. It helps me prepare. And I have to say, last year, I won my league, and this was a big part of it because I was most prepared in the draft because I used the DFS Optimizer. You also get the player position tool. This charts where every offensive and defensive player lines up by the game. You get DFS projections and NFL stat tables. You also get to become part of the private Facebook group, and you get group and member bonuses. That gets unveiled in just a couple weeks in June, Jordan.
Nice. I'm excited again. So basically, the people just leave a review with either their Twitter handle or email, and then the randomly selected winner will get a subscription to PFF Elite. Like I said, I might form some aliases and leave some reviews so I get a better chance of winning this myself. That's a great thing. So go, please leave a review and get a chance to win this PFF Elite. All right. Moving on, we decided that we were going to start this podcast series off by examining the quarterbacks for the 2018 draft class. If you missed episode 1, which I mentioned earlier, may or may not be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, we discussed Sam Darnold and Josh Rosen. We liked a lot about both of those guys. There's just a tremendous skill set for the next level from both of them. We'd like to see Darnold maybe speed up his mechanics, maybe shorten his delivery mechanics a little bit, and we'd like to see Rosen maybe work on his intermediate and deep accuracy a little bit coming into this season. But now we're gonna transition on to some other quarterbacks. We're going to talk about we did the Battle of Los Angeles, Josh. So I think maybe we should do the Battle of Oklahoma next. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd sing that horrible Broadway song, but I don't know it. So continue.
I don't know that one. But
Oklahoma with a blah 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 blah. Yeah, see, I don't know it. I know the word Oklahoma's in it.
Yeah. Musical theater is not our strong suit here. So yeah, we're gonna switch to these quarterbacks from Oklahoma. We have Baker Mayfield, and then Oklahoma State we have Mason Rudolph. Now it's important to note that our group of PFF analysts, our PFF scouting department is sort of like an NFL scouting department in that we all have different opinions. We all have strong opinions. We still come to a consensus board. But, there was like this past year, Josh, I know we had Trubisky on our board as the top quarterback, the PFF big board, but there was a lot of us, including you and I, who had Mahomes as our QB1.
There were. And boy, it's so interesting to see how those play out because of where they ended up going. Obviously, you've got Chicago. That's a rough situation for Trubisky. He's probably going to be the man right away, so he's going to get a lot of reps. And you have the complete opposite situation for our guy, Mahomes, in Kansas City. So that's all part of the equation going forward. And that's one of the things that I always like to remind people is that, hey, the draft process doesn't end on draft day. The draft process continues throughout the player's career. So really, we don't know who's going to turn out to be the better guy. It really doesn't matter that one was taken second overall, one was taken 10th.
And we'll get to Mahomes a little bit later and why the Chiefs drafted him a little bit later on in the show. But again, we're gonna go back. We're gonna start with these Oklahoma quarterbacks because there's two quarterbacks there with NFL potential. First one we're going to start off with Josh Baker Mayfield from Oklahoma. Now, this guy's grades in our system are just unbelievable. If we can sort through all these different categories for different signature stats and like near the top or at the top and like almost all of them, it seems is Baker Mayfield. Good.
Yeah, he's probably the easiest player in this class to search for when we're looking at stats because every single one is at or near the top. So we don't have to go sifting through, resorting by college and then finding his numbers and then figuring out his ranking that way. There's a lot of different things we have to do normally to figure out where these guys rank at different stat categories. But Mayfield seems to be at the top in just about everything.
Yeah, I know he did really well in his adjusted completion percentage, 79.8. That ranks number one among all returning FBS quarterbacks. So, that's really impressive. And then also, under pressure is his adjusted completion percentage goes to 67.6, and that's number one among returning quarterbacks, tied at least with Sam Darnold. So again, here's this guy who's just the statistical leader in several different categories. From us, he's got our highest returning QB rating of any of the FBS quarterbacks as well. So again, a lot to like about Baker's game from a statistical standpoint. But he's also in a pretty high-powered offense. They like to spread everything out and throw the ball around. And so it sort of leads somewhat to, I think the system sort of leads to him sort of, looking good statistically. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of short passes, Josh. So like a lot of easier reads, things like that. So I think that even though his grades are good, I think they're maybe somewhat sort of aided by the system there in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. One of the stats that sticks out to me that he's not ranked near the top end is in terms of the percentage of his yards passing that came through the air, and it was only 51%. That ranks him 65th in the country among returning FBS quarterbacks. So basically what that means is that, as you mentioned, a lot of short, intermediate passing where his receivers are doing a lot after the catch. And he obviously had some prime weapons with two running backs drafted, and obviously D.D. Westbrook wide receiver as well. We had a couple of top 100 picks within those guys. So he's not having any of those guys back. So it's going to be an interesting year for him in terms of that. Does that open the offense up as he has to move it downfield more? Does he have other guys able to step in immediately and fill those same type of roles that Oklahoma always seems to have? That's going to be an interesting piece of his game to watch this year.
No, I totally agree. And that's, and that loss of talent really impacts him because, one of the signatures of his game is his playmaking ability and his ability to extend plays with his legs and then find one of his guys and make a throw, like a D.D. Westbrook or a Mixon. And those guys are gone now. So he said so that, not only are his amazing targets gone, but also, again, that sort of outlet for his what makes him unique and that unique ability to extend plays, and that's also gone. So that'll be something to watch this year for him. So we'd like to see, again, out of Baker, we'd like to really see him sort of respond, to that lack of playmakers and still have another, really productive year from a statistical standpoint. The other thing that I'd really like to see from him at some point, Josh, is I think there needs to be a sort of change in his mechanics at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely an issue that we saw. And this is something that even those within PFF that really, really love Mayfield acknowledge that it's a pretty considerable issue for him. His base when he throws is so wide, and he's already right at 6 foot at best. I mean, he's not a big kid, and that's something that's going to be talked about quite a bit leading up to the draft process. So he's making his release point that much lower, first of all. More importantly, he's not able to get any power with his lower body because he can't create that torque as he follows through. And this is when he has a clean pocket, obviously. When he's under pressure, that's a different story altogether. So ultimately, he's losing velocity and accuracy on most all of his throws because of his poor lower body mechanics. So he can get away with that at Oklahoma. Again, short passes, open receivers, letting them do their thing. But how does that translate to the next level? That's a little worrisome. We definitely want to see if he can shorten up that stride and narrow that base a bit, Jordan.
Yeah, definitely, Josh. I mean, we discussed his height and, we sort of comped, from a physical standpoint, sort of comped him to Drew Brees. But, one of the things that we mentioned is that, Baker, like we said, sort of gets shorter in the pocket because he's so wide, but Brees gets taller in the pocket. He just stands really upright. He's up on his tippy toes. So he kind of counteracts his lack of height by getting taller in the pocket. And Baker hasn't quite learned how to do that yet. So hopefully, again, that'll be something we can see from him this year. But again, going back to, like you said, there's some people in PFF who are really high on Mayfield. Again, lots to like about this guy. It's really going to be interesting to see, though, how he can overcome that loss of playmakers on offense. Now, the other quarterback that we're going to talk about is not lacking playmakers on offense this year, and that's Oklahoma State's Mason Rudolph. So he is one of the lucky quarterbacks in FBS that gets to play with an NFL wide receiver basically on his outside in James Washington. So not everybody has that option. Josh, James Washington's one of the best wide receivers in the country and definitely one of the best deep threats, in the country. And I think that you really kind of see that reflected in some of Rudolph's, numbers and performance statistics, because I'm sure every quarterback would love to be able to throw a deep pass to James Washington.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those deep passes real quick. First of all, Rudolph, 13 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a 125.7 QB rating, which was second for returning FBS quarterbacks. That's on deep passes, so passes that travel at least 20 yards downfield. Now, in terms of his weapons, you mentioned Washington. He had, I believe, 690 yards receiving on deep passes. That's the most in the country among returning wide receivers. And then McCleskey, their number 2 guy this year, he's back as well. Those two combined for 25 catches and over 1,000 yards. So McCleskey had, I want to say, 330 yards on those deep passes too. So that's a ton of production on deep balls that certainly is helping him out and is returning this year. So expect this to be, again, a very explosive offense.
And then one of the things too that we really liked about him, I mean, we know he has weapons, but he showed some really good ability on some of those deep throws too, especially deep outs. Like, you and I both really liked his ability to throw that deep out. That was, he had an NFL ability there. And as Steve Palazzolo mentioned, sometimes we can get a little enamored with the quarterbacks who can throw the deep out.
Right.
In the evaluating process, but really, really talented. But one thing that you noticed though is that he's a little bit better throwing to one side when he throws those outs than the other.
Yeah, it was interesting just in general. Throwing to his right side, he was not as accurate as throwing to the other side. You look at his throws of 10 plus yards to the right, 27 of 66 were completed. And on the left side, 31 of 51 were completed. So that's it's not huge sample sizes, of course, but at the same time, that's a pretty substantial difference in completion percentage to each side. And it's not like his guys are dropping a lot of balls either. So I wouldn't say that much of that variance is due to wide receiver error too. So honestly, I don't know that either of us really saw anything from him mechanical wise that would explain why he's apparently less accurate throwing to his right than his left. But that's something to look at going forward this year to see if that's how his charting continues to play out or if he tends to improve that this year.
No, I totally agree. And then like you mentioned his mechanics. I mean, we didn't really see that many, mechanical flaws with him. I mean, he's got a nice compact delivery. He can throw to all three levels. But for some reason, some passes just seem to get away from him at times, or it wasn't as consistent. You'd like to see him work on his consistency a little bit at the intermediate level this year, and you're going to get the chance to do that. He's returning his playmakers. He's going to have a big year. He's going to be, likely in the mix as one of the top few quarterbacks, when this all gets said and done. So again, a lot to like about Mason Rudolph, and you're going to have a big year there from him, don't you think, Josh?
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. Certainly, if you're into the gambling aspect of it, take a look at what his odds are for Heisman, and certainly consider putting a wager on there because he's going to be right up there. He's going to have absolutely massive numbers, and Oklahoma State is going to win a lot of games because that entire offensive battery in terms of those top-end wide receiver talents and him are back. One thing you did mention his inconsistencies in terms of throws and then tending to get away with them. I do want to touch on that just a little bit. We saw that quite a bit on some of the deep balls. While he's certainly accurate and productive downfield, I thought he left some yardage in some even bigger plays on the field because his guys would beat their man so easily, and he tended to just release the ball too early, loft it way up in the air. Some point out that may be a coaching point, that's the way Oklahoma State wants it, that they simply want their guys to get the ball downfield and not necessarily get the home run every single play. But that to me was an issue. We'll see if that changes at all, or again, if that's part of coaching. And in general, the ball just at times seems to come out of his hands funny. So while he has the skill set, he has his compact delivery, he can deliver with velocity, the ball just seems to come out of his hand funny at times, and I worry about his consistency with that.
Now, hopefully he can get that, that part cleaned up. We know there's, a lot to like about Rudolph. We had some people, actually, I think there's probably a few of our analysts who really view Rudolph as the QB1 at this point in the draft process. I'm not necessarily one of those. Rudolph necessarily, isn't my guy. I know he is some of other people's guys. Now, Josh, why don't you talk about one of your guys for this draft that's not necessarily a quarterback, but you really just, really stood out to you on film that you're really passionate about this year for this draft?
Yeah, and I don't think this is going to be a very controversial one. While he doesn't play a position that normally goes in the top 5 or certainly number 1, I think he's going to be in the discussion all year long as he comes back from his injury from last year. And that's Florida State safety Derwin James. As a freshman in 2015, he was really phenomenal, Jordan. 22 total pressures. I think he was second in pass rush productivity among safeties that season. And again, that's starting as a true freshman. He's a top athlete. Everything about him on film says he's an upperclassman. You look at his body type, his instincts, his speed, his explosion. That looks like an upperclassman. For some reason, I imagined Garrett Bowles in my head, because we talk about how sometimes the Mormon players, especially on the offensive line, they're men playing amongst boys very literally, because they're older, they've been on the missions, and oftentimes they're 25, 26 years old. Well, there are times on film where James looks like that, and he was 18. So just a huge hitter, can consistently dislodge the ball when whether he's creating a fumble off a run play or breaking up a pass as well. Very loose hips in coverage. There are times where he'd get overly aggressive with his angles, or maybe he'd flip his hips too early, but he's such a natural athlete. He has the ability to recover. So once he figures all that out, I think he's going to be that much more dangerous. Worth pointing out that opponents, when they targeted him in coverage, when he was the primary defender, 47.1 completion percentage against. That's pretty darn good for a freshman safety. I love the angles he takes to the ball, especially in coverage from off. Again, that speed just allows him to close in a flash. Explosive blitzer, we talked about that a little bit. How about some of the versatility he showed as a freshman? Just think about this. A college freshman coming in and playing this volume of snaps at so many different positions. 132 snaps at linebacker, 132 snaps at slot cornerback, 46 at strong safety, and 405 at free safety. That's just the entire package, Jordan.
Yeah, that's what was so intriguing about him, and I'm totally on board with you with this. I was blown away by Derwin on film. One of the, and like you said, one of the first things I noticed was, his physicality and his hittingness and his grown manness, if you will. And I actually wrote down in my notes, this is your dad's strong safety. Because that's what he reminds me of, is those old school strong safeties who, would hit you and dislodge the ball. Now you can't really do that because they throw flags for it, and we like our players a little bit, really rangy. But this guy has that range too, but he just smacks people. He really, he's great on all three levels, Josh. I mean, like you mentioned, he can rush the passer off the edge. I've seen him beat tackles. I've seen him beat running backs. He plays the run like a linebacker when he's on that second level. Like you said, you're just coming downhill fast and just exploding into people. And then you could put him on the back end and he looks like a free safety back there. I mean, just incredible prospect, Josh. It's a great choice for your guy.
Yeah, I'll say this in terms of a comp. He's peak Jabril Peppers in terms of what people maybe at this time last year expected Jabril Peppers to be, or want Jabril Peppers to be, or think that he could because of his athleticism and toughness and all that. I think Derwin James is very much already there in all three phases of the game. And boy, I hope he comes back and plays well after that injury last year that killed his season, because boy, is he fun to watch.
Right, and he has to, if he can return to that 2015 form, he has to be at least in serious consideration for the first defensive player taken, and a top 5 pick. I mean, that's how good he is. Tremendous player. That's it right now as we look at the 2018 draft. We're now going to turn back the clock a little bit and look at the 2017 draft, just like we did in the last episode. We're going to take you guys inside the war room. We're going to do 2 teams again. In these segments, we try to take you in and sort of talk about the teams and what went behind their picks. Last week we did the Arizona Cardinals, and we also did the Denver Broncos. And then this week we're doing San Francisco 49ers, and we're also doing the Kansas City Chiefs. So, all right, Josh, are you ready to get going inside the war room?
Yeah, let's do it. First of all, some general points that some of the 49ers front office brass made reference to multiple times, both during the process and after their picks. First off, they felt scheme fit for them was more important than how the league actually viewed the players. That's an interesting point, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Ultimately, what we were saying with that is there's probably going to be some variance in terms of how their board stacks up compared to other boards, because guys that fit their scheme are certainly going to be higher in there as well. Guys that don't, even though they might be considered generally very high are not going to be nearly as highly thought of by that front office.
Yeah, and this is this has got to be one of the more intriguing situations in the league, right? Like front office, head coaching situations, because we have a first-year head coach, we have a first-year GM, and they're both getting 6-year deals, and so that's just sort of unprecedented when you think about it, and they're both kind of like trying to figure this whole thing out together. So it's really neat, like you said, they sort of view scheme as being really important because they're trying to establish what they're trying to establish, and they really sort of focus on that, like, as far as Kyle Shanahan seems to be picking the offensive players, and John Lynch seems to be sort of picking the defensive players, which also is a really kind of cool thing to sort of see that split. Because, there's always some sort of level of split between what the GM says and what the coach says and what sort of, input they have. This almost seems to be like a 50-50 split between John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. They really had a pretty good first draft, honestly, for never have done it before. They came out with some really, really, really good picks.
Yeah, I think those first two picks are going to be pretty interesting in terms of how they use them, how they pan out. I think there's obviously reason for extreme optimism with both, but there's a little bit of skepticism to be had about them as well. Solomon Thomas, interesting thing about him, obviously, is the fact that they've maybe drafted the same position 3 straight years in the first round. So it's going to be interesting to see how they use all of them. For that being said, they did both mention that they see Solomon Thomas moving all over the defensive line, playing potentially all 4 positions interchangeably. So that makes some sense with that there.
Yeah, and they view him, like when you think about it, because we both looked at DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead when they came out, and they're, giant, long men, and Thomas has a sort of very different body style.
Yes.
So that's, like you said, that's, even though they drafted the sort of same position, like you said, they really think that he's different and unique, compared to those other people who are already on their roster. So it's really going to be interesting to see where they actually end up playing him.
Yeah, obviously he's going to get his time. They seem to be convinced that he's going to play a number of positions, and we did kind of like him in that hybrid role coming in. I'm going to be interested to see what becomes of Eric Armstead. He hasn't graded well his first 2 years. We really didn't like him coming out. Let's be honest. I don't know if PFF did this, and his being drafted predated both of our tours of duty with PFF. We didn't like him either in that respect, and like I said, he hasn't panned out. So I'm interested to see what becomes of him, if they carve out a very more specific niche role for him, or if he ends up getting pushed out altogether. I think that's possibly part of it. Let's move on to the second pick in the first round. That's Reuben Foster. They made reference to the fact that they got 2 of their top 3 players on the board. Yeah. This isn't a huge surprise, this kind of statement, because we, throughout the draft process, injuries aside, loved Reuben Foster. Now that's going to be an issue going forward, how both those shoulders pan out, because it sounds like he has issues in both of them, which would explain why he fell so far. But some of the things they've said about him, he's likely to start off as a will. This was definitely a John Lynch pick, and you referenced the fact that it seems that Shanahan's taken control of the offense, constructing that part of the roster, Lynch on defense, and that was certainly made evident with their comments on this.
Right, and then one of the things that we'll talk about, like Shanahan really likes to focus on his offensive players, on guys that fit his scheme and cutting ability. We'll talk about that later, but Lynch really likes to physical guys. He really wants, that's what he's focusing on defense. He really wants physical guys that hit. And so, yeah, you see his quotes about this guy, he just starts to light up when he thinks about Reuben Foster. That's why they traded up for him. Like you said, he was like their number 3 guy on their board. So they just felt like he was a game-changing player. They felt they needed to trade up for him. Lynch says he's at sideline to sideline. He'll hit anything that moves, which is basically how, John Lynch played. So this was totally a John Lynch pick, as you said, as was Solomon Thomas, because, one of those little interesting tidbits is that they were actually classmates together at Stanford as when Solomon was a freshman. I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, these 2 guys, you think about we looked at so many players in the pre-draft process, Josh, and Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster were just 2 of the premier defenders in this class. And, in the 49ers, to add two pieces like that to their front seven, that's huge. That's really beneficial for them. They stayed on defense with their next pick. I'm sure Kyle Shanahan was probably starting to get a little upset, but they picked a guy that we liked a lot, in Akello Weatherspoon, the corner from Colorado. They said that they view him as an outside corner, and they think that he can compete to start right away. That was something that I felt, leading up to the draft process. I felt that he could come in and start right away because he was so smart. And just had such a good athletic profile. He's really tall, moves really well, just a really talented kid who hasn't been playing football for a ton of time, but has been really good when he's been doing it.
Again, talking about that size, John Lynch specifically said he has the athleticism of someone who's 5'9", but is now a long 6'3", which I think that played itself out in film. That's certainly something we agree with.
Oh yeah,
and that's just the direction that the NFL is going right now. I can't help but think, Jordan, that if this were a different year, let's say Akello had another year of eligibility and he came out next year. Now, obviously, we don't know the full class, what it's going to look like, but it's really hard to envision it being anywhere near as deep at cornerback and safety as it was this year. I have to think just simply because of that, not to mention his production on the field, and Lynch also talked about how smart he thought he was in terms of his coverage ability. I have to think he would have been a first-round pick. So the kind of value to get out of him there was really, really excellent. One thing that they did show a little bit of concern about with him was a perceived lack of physicality when tackling. And he's not the first of the Colorado secondary players to get that little bit of a knock. That was also said sometimes about Tedrick Thompson, the safety that we really liked. But John Lynch thought that he saw enough examples of him on film that that was going to be okay. And having the toughness at the first two levels of the first round picks, Solomon Thomas, Reuben Thomas, that's going to help draw out the toughness in him too. So I thought it was interesting hearing him say that as well.
Yeah, I mean, just like you hit a bunch of great points. Like you said, like that really long frame with that really good foot quickness. And again, I think a lot of it, I mean, like they say that, so it's sort of that his foot quickness for his size is because he played soccer. He's a cross-sport athlete, and that's where he got that from. But again, like that sort of, I think why he's a little bit behind the curve in some of the football stuff, like probably also why he's lacking in physicality a little bit. Like you said, Josh, another year at corner in FBS, and this guy would have been a first-round pick. He was just so impressive to watch on film. There's plenty of examples of times where he got beat initially, like maybe on giving up inside leverage on a slant, but was still so long that he was able to recover and knock the pass down. You know what I mean? Just makes a ton of plays on the ball. I really think he has a chance to start and be a great player for them right out of the gate. Now, the next player that they took was finally an offensive player, C.J. Beathard, and this is really interesting because again, this is a Kyle Shanahan pick, and when you see when I watch the press conferences, like Shanahan is basically saying that this is a guy that really fits what he likes, what he wants in the system. Really mentions, play action. They really like to, use play action in that Shanahan offense. So he really wanted to see it on film, out of their college quarterbacks. So that's what he really liked about Beathard. But again, like this really shows you in my mind that Kyle is sort of picking the offensive players, because this is the guy that he wanted, and it's the guy that they ended up taking. Now, I know that you've watched the the Big Ten a lot, Josh. They said that they valued his 2015 tape more than his 2016 tape. Did you see that when you watched him over the last 2 years?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Heading into the season last year around this time, we projected all conference teams, and Beathard was projected to be my first team All Big Ten quarterback based off what he did the prior year. Really liked what he did in terms of his running ability, and Shanahan mentioned his ability in terms of running play action keepers at Iowa. That was certainly a big feature there. And throughout his career, you did see him battle through adversity, his toughness in the pocket, his ability to play through pain, take hits, try and deliver the ball. My biggest issue with him, especially this past season, and some of this, again, you could probably attribute to the lack of playmakers outside, but just his poor accuracy on outside balls. It really was not there. Downfield, intermediate, and outside the numbers. That was a real issue for them. It basically just constricted where they worked at on the field. One other point I want to get back to on that, and this kind of leads into another player that they didn't say much on, but obviously fits right in stride with Beathard. You mentioned how they valued the 2015 tape more than the 2016 tape. And this was the same that we thought with George Kittle, their tight end, and who they also drafted later in the 5th round. A guy we absolutely loved on film in terms of his all-around skill set. And again, because of a number of issues, injuries, certainly part of it, also did not have a great 2016. So interesting that they mentioned the 2015 tape, because I got to think that applies to Kittle as well.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. That I saw a couple teams that had mentioned the years before the season, tape from the season before, and almost placing more value on it sometimes in the senior tape, which was really, really interesting. They added the next pick they added on offense was Joe Williams, a running back from Utah. The number one reason they added this guy, and people are going to think it's the speed. I mean, the speed, helps because he runs in the 4.3s. But the number one reason they drafted him was he has the cutting trait that they value. That basically, again, that offense, they want to stretch you out and run that outside zone, and then they want the running back who can just, where it's a whole boom, and then plant that foot, cut, get north-south. That's really what they want. They really, the one coach that Kyle Shanahan brought with him was running back coach Bobby Turner. And Bobby Turner has a huge, huge say in the running backs that they draft. And so Bobby basically has to sign off on them. So Bobby and Kyle both signed off on Joe. They like Joe. One of the concerns about Joe Williams is that he left the program for a little while, for personal reasons. They felt that they felt comfortable with that. They like how he overcame adversity. So they're, excited about the pick. Again, a speedy back for their offense who should hopefully maybe even get some playing time as a rookie.
Yeah, you talk about speed with Joe Williams, and ultimately I don't think that's his best trait. Again, the cutting ability is huge for them, and they talked about this. One of the most intriguing comments we heard from anybody throughout this process, not just from the 49ers, is that they mentioned that when you have a player who runs 4.3, typically they're not able to make the same level of cuts because they're just going too fast. You can't physically do that typically. So again, they value that much more, especially with their outside zone scheme, the fact that he can hit those cutback lanes. Trent Taylor, wide receiver they took, same deal with him, just an excellent route runner, can make very precise cuts, not going to be an absolute burner, but again, doesn't have to be a 4.3 guy, and they bring a different skill set, and that's okay. Now, San Fran obviously had a lot of picks. We could talk about any number of them. The last one, though, that I want to get into is a guy that you and I looked at pretty late in the process and fell in love with him in terms of potential and a very specialized skill set, I should say, is Pita Talmopenu, if I'm pronouncing it anywhere near correctly. But
not bad.
He's a guy that had just a ton of missed tackles at Utah, but he was an explosive edge rusher, just a really dangerous threat off the edge, and they made reference to that. They thought in the range that they got him, which was the 6th round, that he was the best pass rusher out there. That's why they took a shot at him. They acknowledged they have all these other big guys that they took earlier. They really wanted a specialized speed rusher off the edge, and I think Pete is going to bring that to them. And I love the fact that they're already talking about giving him a very specialized role.
They even said, though, that whoever the best pass rusher ends up being is going to be their Leo, and they didn't rule out that it could end up being Pita. So he could end up getting this pass rush role as a rookie. The one thing to keep in mind for them in next year's draft, they have considerable draft capital at the top of the draft. They have 1 first rounder, they have 2 seconds, and 3 thirds. So I really expect them, Josh, to make a move to try to get a quarterback that'll really fit Coach Shanahan's scheme next year. All right, let's move on and let's go to the AFC West, to the Kansas City Chiefs war room, and they picked some players we really, really liked. So I'm excited to sort of look into this one. The first thing that sort of jumped out at me right off the bat, and this will be interesting to all draft fans out there, is that Chiefs GM John Dorsey had his actuaries go through and actually quantify how long it takes for the team to put together the big board. Like, how long does it take to do all of that stuff? And they said it takes approximately 60,000 man-hours to put completely together. So when you think about your favorite NFL team and the work that goes into their draft, just remember it's about 60,000 man-hours. So it's a lot of work. Again, this is a team that sort of had a different, strategy than some of the other teams. I think they really wanted to go after a quarterback, and they really wanted to go after Patrick Mahomes. That was basically the guy they wanted. And so that basically kind of shaped their whole draft, wouldn't you say, Josh?
Well, yeah, of course. When you're trading up 17 spots to get a quarterback, that is going to shape your draft because ultimately you're going to lose parts of your draft because of that. I thought it was interesting. They talked about how many different deals they were working on to try and move up to different possibilities. They said 5 or 6 different deals. The one with Buffalo started 5 days prior to the draft, which I guess really shouldn't be that surprising, but that tells you how much they absolutely fell in love with him. They felt that there were 3 other teams trying to get Mahomes. So I thought that was interesting that there was so much interest out there. Arizona is certainly someone that was plugged out as a team that was potentially interested in him throughout. And
I think Houston was another one, right?
Yeah, I kind of wonder about that with Houston. I find that interesting. I don't have any issues with what they did with Watson,
right,
but I wonder if they had basically Mahomes at 1A and Watson at 1B and that they were ready to go get whichever one they could. And Kansas City just ended up going up a little bit farther and possibly taking Mahomes, who maybe is a guy that Kansas City had identified as Houston wanting as well.
Yeah, it's again, I think that Dorsey just felt like he had to go get him. Like there was just too many other teams that were interested in him, and they come from that Ron Wolf school of if there's a quarterback there that you want, go get him. But then they talked about how you can't make a move like that unless everybody in the building basically buys off on it.
Apparently you can, as we saw with Chicago.
Yeah, I
Maybe
guess
you shouldn't, but
yeah, I guess that was a slightly different scenario. You're right. That was the quarterback, the trade that was not shared with the coach. But this situation was quite different. Everybody in the whole building loved Patrick, and they all sort of signed off on it. They think he's a rare talent. So they're really, really excited that they were able to go get him. Just a lot of the things that they liked were the same things that we liked. Just his ability to make plays with his arm that they you don't really see. I mean, just his a rare ability to just create plays and make plays. He's just a tremendous talent. They admit that he's got work to do. There's a great quote from Andy Reid where he's talking about the differences between these air raid or spread type quarterbacks, but he said it's kind of like with every young quarterback. This is the quote. He said, "This is with every young quarterback, getting to know the coverages per your routes that you're going to ask him to deal with, per the drop that is asked to make that throw against those coverages. So it takes a little bit of time to get all that down. So all that stuff takes time. So it's going to take him a little while. But They say he's not going to necessarily ready to play right away, but Josh, I don't know if he's necessarily not ready to play as a rookie. I'm not going to rule out that maybe he can't come in around week 10 and sort of take Kansas City to, another level than an Alex Smith.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I could definitely see a scenario where he's coming in and playing fairly quickly. And part of that is his preparation, which is, again, something else that they both cited. Andy Reid in particular, everybody fell in love with the kid. That's what he's all about, how he went about his business. Those are words straight from Andy Reid's mouth. And that's something that we talked about throughout the draft process. Again, he's Pat Mahomes Jr. Senior was a Major League Baseball pitcher for a decade. Yeah. He was born and raised to be a professional athlete. He knows how to be a professional athlete. And that stuff matters. It's not like everyone thought, you know what, Dak Prescott taken in the 4th round last year, but he might be ready to play right away. No, nobody thought that. But why was he? Preparation. Why was Russell Wilson a 3rd round pick? Played in multiple schemes on multiple teams in college. Why was he ready to play? Preparation. So
Right.
that stuff matters, and that's going to help him translate quicker to the NFL than I think people are maybe expecting.
No, I totally agree because, we loved his talent on the field, but we really loved his talent off the field as well. We thought he was one of the safer prospects in this draft off the field because we thought he was just going to prepare and work really hard, prepare and work like a pro from the day he got his new team. And that sounds like that's basically already what he's doing in Kansas City. So again, neither one of us will be shocked if he plays as a rookie, but, we fully expect him to sit for a while, but then we fully expect him to be a really good quarterback for the future for the Chiefs. And as you like to say, Josh, and I totally agree with this, if the Raiders keep going well and Mahomes develops well, that the Chiefs-Raiders rivalry is going to be historic again, don't you think?
Yeah, it really is. I'm really excited to see how that pans out because certainly the Raiders, again, they look like they're going to be one of the elite teams in the NFL for a while because they have premier players on both sides of the ball. And if Mahomes pans out like you and I think, Kansas City's going to be right up there, and boy, that's going to lead to some fun, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Now, the next pick that the Chiefs took was Villanova defensive lineman Tano Capasano. And they view him as a 5 technique defensive end. They really liked his length. They also said that they can envision him kicking down to the 3 technique in passing rushing situations. So again, like a guy, I think they're expected to move up and down the line of scrimmage there. And they really liked the way that he sort of developed over the last couple of years. And then also like the way that he's developed at the Senior Bowl. So they liked his motor. There's a lot to like about Tano. Again, I think he sort of fits their scheme. I think he's still a little bit, he's still got some learning to do, but they like that player. The next guy they took there was a player that we both really liked. I know you were really high on him, Josh, and they saw this guy the same way you did. If you want to go on to the next one,
yeah, they traded up and took Toledo running back Kareem Hunt, who was one of my guys. We talked about Derwin James being one of my guys for this year. Well, Kareem Hunt was one of my first my guys from last year. I put out a tweet at some point that said, why spend a 1st round pick on one of these top end guys when you can get Kareem Hunt toward the end of day 2 somewhere?
And John Dorsey totally backed you up.
Yeah, he did. My boy, John Dorsey, basically said the same thing. He'd mentioned how he might be number 4 or so in the class, certainly at the top of that second tier. And so that's what they went after. Some of the things that they highlighted that they loved about him: 4-year starter, over 5,000 yards, 44 rushing touchdowns, so a ton of production, ton of experience. They loved the fact that he was also productive in the passing game, 48 receptions last year, only lost 1 fumble his entire career. That's something that tends to get lost in the shuffle, the fumbles, and certainly that was an issue with a couple of the guys coming out, in particular the kid from Florida State who is now with the Minnesota Vikings. But just 1 lost fumble his entire career, Kareem Hunt. He's a guy that can do everything, contribute on all 3 downs immediately. It's going to be intriguing to see how much he plays right away and if he ends up being a starter very quickly in Kansas City.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why we liked him, was his ability to make an impact from the pass game. Not a lot of running backs can. We thought that he could right away with his ability to catch the ball. And then one of the other things that we liked about him, I said that he had rare balance when he came out, but they used the Chiefs in their press conference used the phrase contact balance 3 times within the span of 4 minutes. So they saw the same thing as we saw. They really like him, and I think, he could end up playing early. They also mentioned they liked his performance during the Senior Bowl week. And then, Josh, I know that the next offensive player they took, you probably have a better handle on than I do. And again, it goes back to the guy that they liked on his 2015 more than his 2016 film. Yeah,
that's J.U. Chesson, the receiver from Michigan. And That's such an interesting comment, again, looking at his 2015 film. And again, you have to look at the context of the situation. For whatever reason, in 2016, with a brand new quarterback, Chesson never gelled. He had some drops. He ran some bad routes, just never really seemed to get on the same page as Wilton Speight, as he did the year before with Michigan's quarterback then. And it was really the last 4 or 5 games of the 2015 season where he absolutely took off. He hosted Vernon Hargreaves in the bowl game against Florida on a double move for a long touchdown. He almost single-handedly helped really what was at that point a very depleted and undermanned Michigan defense that couldn't stop Indiana. He really brought Michigan to victory with his ridiculous play in that game against Indiana. And those last 4 or 5 games, he looked every bit like he was going to be a top 5 receiver in this class. So, yes, there are things that you don't necessarily like on film, but you also have to like his aggressiveness as a run blocker. That was mentioned by the staff as well. Again, we talked about the double move on Vernon Hargreaves, so you can stretch out for that deep ball. So there are pieces there that you like when you go back to that 2015 film, and getting him where they did, that's really good value as well.
Okay, yeah, they went on and took a couple defenders. We're just going to go over quickly here. Okeme Legwe, fast linebacker, and then Leon McQuay, versatile DB. They view him as a corner, possibly a nickel. That wraps up our look inside those war rooms and our look at the 2017 draft. We're going to take you to another draft. We're going to go take you to the draft memory segment. And this is my own personal draft memory, Josh. But it's of more than one draft. It's actually of hundreds upon hundreds of drafts that exist basically only in my head. There used to be, I'm old, Josh. I don't know if you know that about me. But in the 70s, the Parker brothers came out with a game called Pro Draft. And it was this little silly board game that had like this orange half of a football, and it came with like some Topps playing cards, and you basically spun the wheel, and you would pick a player. It was only like offensive players basically, but you got a little number for their value, so it was kind of random. So maybe a guy would be a 90, and you're like, oh, my quarterback's a 90, yeah. And you built like the best offense, and then at the end you kind of counted all your points together and see who had the best draft. So I was really good GM in Pro Draft. I destroyed neighborhood kids for decades. I'm not sure exactly when I got it or how long I had it. I had it up until, I don't know, I think I lost it probably around 2000. I'll have to get another one at some point on eBay. But anyways, yeah, that Pro Draft, Josh, like we talk about our passions for the draft and our memories about certain drafts. And that one really sort of stoked my passion for the draft, getting to play that nerdy board game as a kid. Because like I said, I'm a veteran of hundreds of drafts, Josh. You just don't know about them.
That's funny. That reminds me of what was that game? It was a video game, came out around 2005. I think it was called NFL Head Coach. Yeah. I had it on my Wii, and it was the worst, buggiest game ever. It broke down constantly. Way too many features of it didn't work. Man, I played that thing nonstop. Probably that was right after I got married, so that game up by itself probably just about got me a divorce settlement out of the deal. But it didn't matter how buggy it was. I loved doing it because I loved being able to forget all the gameplay that you have to go through when you do, man. I just loved being able to construct a roster, going through practice, doing all that stuff. And so that was something that certainly helped elevate the draft in my eyes as well. So I think that's interesting that we both had our version of these games that really stoked the fire of the draft for us.
Yeah, for sure. And now that you mentioned the year 2005, Josh, that brings us to the world famous Draft Time Machine, Josh. We are back with the Draft Time Machine. Josh, why don't you tell everybody who didn't listen last week about the Draft Time Machine?
Yeah, Draft Time Machine is something we're going to go throughout the year. We're going to look at historical draft picks and how the landscape might have changed if they weren't picked for the team that they were going to. Last week, to debut, we went with one of the most talked about situations in terms of the draft. The 1998 top of the draft, Peyton Manning goes to Indianapolis and Ryan Leaf goes to San Diego. What would have happened had those two been reversed? There's so many different angles to go through with that. Really interesting conversation. This week, we're going to do a little bit of a different one. We're going to go, again, to 2005.
2005. We're going to set the dial to 2005. Now, Josh, the lawyers were upset with you last week because I told you to keep your hands and feet in the time machine at all times, and you did not. So, please keep your hands and feet in the time machine at all times.
Hey, girls just want to have fun.
And let's go mess with the time-space continuum 2005. Go. All right. Now, I want to take us through, the time machine, slightly before that pick in Mobile, Alabama, leading up to the 2005 draft. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers coaching staff is down there, and the head coach falls in love with a prospect there named Cadillac Williams.
Yeah, Caddy.
So now we go to the draft. We are at the draft with the 5th pick of the 2005 NFL draft. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Josh, they're not going to take Cadillac Williams.
Oh, no, don't do it.
They are going to select from the University of California, Aaron Rodgers.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh, boy. I love this one because God, there's so many different angles to this one.
Right.
First of all, obviously, there's the whole Aaron Rodgers versus Alex Smith debate. First of all, a lot of people thought Aaron Rodgers was going to go first overall. Somehow he ends up dropping to Green Bay. But let's talk about first, Jordan, what this means for John Gruden, what this means for Tampa Bay if they take Aaron Rodgers.
For Gruden, we just paired John Gruden with Aaron Rodgers. I think the football gods are thanking us right now that we mess with the time-space continuum. I mean, I can't imagine, that was such a great fit, with those two. But, right off the bat, there's no such thing as the Fired Football Coaches Association. There's no Gruden QB camp. There's no Gruden on ESPN because he's still coaching, Josh. And he's probably won at least one Super Bowl in Tampa, don't you think?
I think you're probably right, and I think that if we have any Vikings, Bears, Lions fans listening, we just earned a 5-star rating with this one, so well done.
That brings up a good point, because you're an NFC North guy. What impact does this make on the NFC North and no Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay?
You have to wonder, first off, let's kind of set up the scenario with Aaron Rodgers. They sat back and let him fall to them. So it's not like a Kansas City situation where they identified we have a quarterback that's either aging or not getting it done and we need to go up and get our guy. That's not what happened. He just kind of fell in their lap. And a lot of people were really surprised to see them take a quarterback at that point in time because Brett Favre was still doing things, was throwing interceptions, throwing touchdowns, doing Brett Favre type things. He still had some life left in him, as we saw him extend his career beyond Green Bay, and that was a very controversial pick for them. Well, if they don't take Aaron Rodgers, then what's to say that they're going to be in position going forward to take another quarterback? Do they just next year end up taking, when they pick 5th overall, do they end up taking Jay Cutler?
Right.
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
Well,
Maybe they don't take a quarterback at all, and Brett Favre finishes his career as a Packer. So think about that.
Yeah, Brett Favre retiring a Packer. That would be incredible. But in one instance that'd be great, but for the long term, that quarterback continuity, that 8 straight years of playoffs that Green Bay's had. I had to think that's all gone. So I had to think that again, that the whole NFC North is completely, different and reworked. Gruden and Rodgers are still in Tampa, winning Super Bowls, juggernaut. That would be very, very interesting scenario, very interesting draft alternate universe scenario. Love the draft time machine, Josh. All right, that's basically sort of wrapping us up for this show, Josh. Again, just want to bring up our PFF Edge and Elite. Again, you can find out information on both of those on profootballfocus.com. And then, Josh, why don't you go ahead and take us out of here?
Yeah, again, leave us a comment, whether and put in your email address, put in your Twitter handle. You could be selected to win the very, very best of PFF that we have to offer, the PFF Elite. I'm not going to go over that again as we went early in the show, but please leave us that 5-star rating. We really appreciate that. If you have any questions for me, if you just want to follow along with what I'm saying on Twitter, my handle is at PFF_Josh. Jordan is PFF_Jordan.
Yeah, all right. That's it, folks. We'll see you next week, and we'll talk about 2 more quarterbacks. Have a good one.